All right, get ready for today's deep dive. We're going to be tackling a question that's been around forever, village or city. But here's the thing, we're looking at it through something pretty unusual, a YouTube video meant for people learning English.
Sounds a little out there, right? But
Mm,
that's what makes it so interesting. Even something as simple as a language learning tool can give us a peek into how we see the world, you know?
exactly. It's called Learn English with Podcast Conversation Episode 1. And it uses, well, conversations, like the title says, to teach words and grammar. And the first one? Yep, you guessed it. Village life versus city life, pros and cons. Now, you shared this video, so I'm guessing you've already seen it. What I'm really curious about is what this conversation tells us, not just about language, but about the values we connect to these different ways of life.
That's a great question. I think what really stands out is how the video doesn't just present these lifestyles as like neutral options. It kind of subtly brings in certain values, assumptions about what a good life means, both in the village and the city.
Okay, let's break it down then. The video's arguments for village life are all about peacefulness, closeness to nature, and a strong sense of community. It's painted as very idyllic, almost like a simpler, more harmonious way of living.
Right. And if we look a bit deeper, I think those arguments show a longing for something a lot of people feel is missing these days, like a sense of belonging, connection, and just tranquility.
It's like that pull towards a slower pace of life,
Yeah.
away from all the craziness. Have you ever felt that pull yourself?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's a very human thing to want to feel grounded, to be a part of something bigger than yourself. And village life, at least how this video shows it, seems to offer that in spades.
But then, of course, there's the flip side, that city allure. The video focuses on opportunities for education, jobs, entertainment, all the things we link with progress and personal growth.
And I think that taps into a whole other set of values, ones that are really tied to how we see success and achievement today. It's all about ambition, depending on yourself, and constantly looking for new experiences.
Yes, it's almost like the city's whispering this promise of reaching your full potential, even if it means giving up some peace and quiet along the way. What's interesting to me is that the video doesn't pretend city life is perfect. It talks about crowds, pollution, things that can definitely impact your well-being.
Right, and I think that's important. It'd be easy to just romanticize city life and only focus on the glamour and excitement. But the video tries to show a more balanced view, admitting there are trade-offs. It's not just about chasing opportunities, it's about deciding what you're willing to sacrifice.
And the video does the same for village life, doesn't it? It mentions that things might not be as advanced there, hinting at some limitations. So it's not saying one is better than the other.
Exactly. It's showing them as two different paths, each with its own good and bad sides. And in the end, the video says the best choice depends on what you, as an individual, prioritize and prefer, which, in a way, is a pretty complex message for a simple language learning tool. It's kind of encouraging learners to really think about these choices, about what matters most to them.
It's like they're saying, hey, learning English is great, but why not take a minute to think about your values and what you want in life? What kind of life do you want to build? Which I think leads to a really interesting question. How do language learning tools, even accidentally, shape our worldview?
Now, that's a great question, and I think it's something we'll be exploring as we go deeper into this. But before we get there, I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier about the allure of the city. This whole idea of ambition, of always striving for success, it speaks to so many people, but it can also make people anxious.
Totally. Like when you're in a city, you're surrounded by people who seem to be doing more, achieving more, being more. It's easy to get caught up in comparing yourself.
And that's where things get really interesting because
Yeah.
I think the video, in a way, is tapping into that very real anxiety, that fear of missing out, that pressure to always be pushing for something more. And it's suggesting, maybe not on purpose, that city life is the answer.
It's like the city is both the problem and the solution. It creates this feeling of urgency, this need to prove yourself. But it also has the potential for rewards, for recognition, for reaching your dreams.
Exactly. And by presenting city life like that, the video is subtly reinforcing a certain worldview, one that prioritizes individual achievement and material success, which isn't necessarily bad, but it's important to see those underlying messages.
It's like those messages are hidden in plain sight, inside a simple conversation about village versus city life. And what's fascinating is that even though it's for English language learners, these messages will probably resonate with a much wider audience.
Absolutely, because these questions about where to live, how to live, what kind of life to aim for, they're universal. They're questions we all face at some point. And I think this video in its own subtle way, is asking us to really engage with those questions.
Okay, I'm loving where this is going. But before we get too philosophical, I want to go back to something else that struck me about the video, is how the dialogue is structured.
Yeah. Tell me more about that. What stood out?
Well, on the surface, it seems like a normal conversation. Two people just chatting about the pros and cons of each lifestyle. But when you listen closely, there's a subtle structure to it. It's almost like a debate disguised as casual talk.
I see what you mean. You're right. There's a back and forth that goes beyond just listing the good and bad things. Each speaker makes a point, and then the other one counters it or adds a new perspective. It keeps things moving and stops it from being one-sided.
Exactly. And I think that's really clever, especially for something meant for language learning, because it shows learners a more nuanced way to use language. Not just stating your opinion, but actually responding to different viewpoints, building on ideas, refining arguments.
It's almost like they're teaching critical thinking along with vocabulary and grammar.
Which, when you think about it, is pretty amazing. It's like they're saying, hey, learning a language isn't just memorizing words and phrases. It's about learning to think critically, to have thoughtful discussions, to deal with complex ideas.
And that's a skill that's useful way beyond just language. It's essential for navigating the world, making good decisions, building strong relationships.
Okay, so we've talked about the values in the video, the subtle structure of the dialogue, and how this seemingly basic language learning tool is actually encouraging critical thinking. Now, I know the video has two other conversations in it, one about getting a pet and another about breakups. You mentioned the Villages A City one was the most relevant for you right now, but I'm curious, what do you think those other scenarios might show us about cultural values?
That's a good point. Even though they might not be directly related to what you're focusing on, those scenarios probably offer more insights into cultural assumptions and beliefs. It's like each conversation is a glimpse into a specific way of thinking, a specific set of values.
Okay, so I'm definitely getting part two vibes here.
Yeah.
We've only scratched the surface of this video, and my brain's already doing somersaults.
I think we're just getting started. There's so much more to uncover, so many layers to peel back. But for now, let's just absorb all this for a bit. Think about what's resonated with you so far.
And we'll be back soon to continue this deep dive.
Picking up from where we left off, I'm fascinated by how this video kind of nudges learners to think about different values without straight up saying, hey, this is good about village life and this is good about city life. It's all just part of the conversation.
Yeah, and it does this through little details and examples that make the arguments come alive. Remember when they talked about people in villages helping each other out, everyone knowing everyone else? It really paints this picture of a close community. And that abstract community values idea suddenly feels real.
Exactly. It's not some vague idea. It's like built into daily life in the village, the way the video shows it at least. And that makes you, the learner, start to connect specific actions and behaviors with this bigger idea community.
And then you start asking yourself, okay, do I even value that close-knit community thing? Would I do well in that kind of environment, or would it feel suffocating? It's like the video is making you think about yourself without even realizing it.
It's pretty clever, actually. And then on the other side, when they talk about city people being more independent and self-reliant, they use examples like using public transport, figuring out a big city, making career choices without your family there to tell you what to do.
It's like they're saying, hey, city life will push you to figure stuff out yourself,
Right.
become more resourceful and adaptable. And some people find that really exciting, right? It's like a challenge, a chance to see what you're made of.
For sure. And this goes back to what we were talking about before, how the city plays on those anxieties about ambition and achievement. If you're already worried about not measuring up, city life is like this constant test. But it also could mean huge rewards if you succeed.
It's a high-stakes game, and the video doesn't hide that. I actually think it kind of glorifies that part of city life, even while admitting it has downsides.
Yeah, I agree. There's definitely an undercurrent of excitement, possibility when they talk about the city. Like, yeah, it's crowded and polluted, but hey, it's also where dreams come true. And I think that message can be really powerful, especially for someone young wanting to make their mark on the world.
And here's where it gets even more interesting. Remember those other two conversations about getting a pet and dealing with the breakup? I'm starting to think they might not be so off topic after all.
Go on. What are you thinking?
Well, both of those scenarios, in their own ways, deal with responsibility, independence, and bouncing back from tough stuff, all things that the city life part of the video emphasizes.
Oh, I see where you're going with this. So it's not just about those direct arguments for or against village or city life. It's about the bigger values and skills that the whole video is subtly promoting.
Exactly. And I think those values fit really well with a modern, individualistic worldview, one that puts personal growth, self-sufficiency, and finding happiness on your own terms first.
Almost like the video is prepping learners to navigate a world where they'll be expected to make their own decisions, solve their own problems, and create their own futures.
Which, in a lot of ways, reflects how things are today, especially in cities.
Right, and this brings us right back to your original question. How do language learning tools, even by accident, shape how we see the world?
Okay, so it's not just about learning how to order food or ask for directions. It's about taking in a whole set of values and ideas about how the world works, what's important, what it means to be successful and happy.
And I think it's important to be aware of those hidden messages, to recognize that even language learning stuff, which seems neutral, can have hidden biases and cultural assumptions.
Because once you see those biases, you can start questioning them. You can ask, do I agree with this? Does it fit with what I believe and want? Or am I being influenced to see things in a way that doesn't really feel right to me?
Right. It's about becoming a more critical consumer of information, even when it's disguised as a fun language learning video.
It's like this video is sneaking in some pretty big ideas, disguised as vocabulary and grammar. Seriously, though, it's fascinating how something as simple as learning a language can lead to these huge discussions about culture, values, and how we understand the world.
And that's what I love about this deep dive. We're not just analyzing a video, we're using it to explore what it shows us about ourselves, our own beliefs and assumptions.
So what does all this mean for the person who sent us this video? What should they take away from what we've talked about?
I think the main takeaway is that language learning goes way beyond words and grammar rules. It's about immersing yourself in a culture, in a way of thinking. And it's about being aware of those values, questioning them, and figuring out which ones resonate with you and which ones you might want to push back on.
It's like learning a language is an invitation to broaden your horizons, to see things from different perspectives, and ultimately build a life that matches your own values and dreams. And speaking of building a life, I'm curious, have you ever personally struggled with deciding between village and city life? Was it an easy choice, or did you really go back and forth?
That's a great question. And to be honest, it's something I've definitely wrestled with at different times in my life. For me, it wasn't a simple this or that decision. I was drawn to both sides.
So you've felt that pull in both directions.
Yeah, definitely. There were times when I just wanted that peace and quiet you get in a village, that feeling of community where everyone knows you. I was kind of romanticizing it, being surrounded by nature, a simpler life, maybe even growing my own food. But then I'd think about all the things I might miss in the city, all the cultural stuff, the job opportunities, just the energy of so many people trying to make something of themselves.
It's like those two sides of you were constantly talking, trying to work out which path felt truer to who you are.
Exactly. And I think a lot of people go through that. We're not simple creatures. We have all sorts of needs and desires. It's rarely a case of one way of life being just plain better.
It's about finding that balance, what works for you at that specific time. And it's interesting how this video, in a way, acknowledges that. It's not saying this is the right way, this is the wrong way. It's saying both are valid options, each with its own good and bad points.
Right. And by doing that, it's kind of encouraging people to embrace that complexity, to see that there are many ways to have a good life.
Which is a really powerful message, especially these days when everything's pushing us towards this one definition of success.
Absolutely. This video, even though it's simple, reminds us there's no one path to happiness or fulfillment. It's about figuring out what really matters to you and building a life that fits those values.
And sometimes that means accepting the messiness, the contradictions, that we might want different things at different points in our lives.
Exactly. It's about being open to exploring, to changing, to realizing that what works now might not work later.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listener with something to think about. We've gone through a lot about village versus city life, the values in this video, how those values might subtly shape how we see the world. But the real question is, what speaks to you?
What parts of each lifestyle really resonate? Which values feel right for the life you want to build? And how might those values guide your choices, not just about where you live, but how you live every single day?
Because in the end, this wasn't just about taking apart a video. It was about using it to learn about ourselves. It's about realizing that we can find insights that help us understand ourselves and the world, even in the most unexpected places.